Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps the first 40 years of your life is not really your life? That everything you lived so far, was it just a rehearsal? Carl Jung, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, stated with all the letters, "Life really starts at 40. Until then, you're just doing research." This breaks everything we learn early on, because since we are young, we are bombarded with the idea that the height of life is youth, that you need to win everything early. Be successful early, loving early, produce early, find early. But what if this is a trap? What if the obsession with living everything in the first 30 years is exactly the reason for so much empty, so much anxiety, and so much frustration? Think to me. In the early years, we are just learning to adapt, to please, to repeat behaviors, responding to what they expect from us. We built a life based on what others call success, and we rarely stop to ask if it really has to do with us. Let's accumulate titles, relationships, objects, followers, but do we find ourselves in this process? That's where Jung's provocation comes in. You may not have really started to live, and that's fine, because the turn comes. It always comes. And when it comes, it looks like a crisis. But it's an invitation. From 40, the questions change. And when the questions change, it's because something much bigger is about to happen. During the first half of her life, we learn to wear a mask. And her name is persona. Jung described the persona as the social face we present to the world. It is that version of yours that pleases at work, which behaves before the family, which adapts to what the environment expects. It is functional. It is necessary. But it's a lie. Because behind the persona there are repressed desires, suffocated impulses, ignored talents, and even pains you don't even know that carries. The persona is useful to survive, but it is limited to live. How many times have you said yes, wanting to say no? How many times have you kept silent not to disappoint? How many decisions did you make just to look right and not to be true? It turns out that the persona is built on external expectations. And the more we move away from our essence, the more we feel that discomfort we can't explain. That's why Jung said, everything we don't face in ourselves, we will find it as a destination. That is, what you hide, 1 hour swallows you, and life will force you to look at it. That's why around 40, the persona begins to crack. What previously worked, stop working. Which once seemed right begins to look false. You realize that you are living a life that is not yours. And it starts for the first time to seek who you really are. Jung said that illuminating one's shadow is the most difficult and most essential work in life. The shadow is not evil itself, but everything you denied, reject, or repress. They are their weaknesses, their trauma, their unconfessed desires, their anger, their envy, their fears, but also their forgotten powers, their repressed creativity, their boldness that was suffocated. Everything that didn't fit the persona ended up in the shadow. And why does that matter? Because what you don't recognize in yourself starts controlling you. Have you noticed that some situations make you react exaggeratedly? What certain types of people irritate you or awaken envy for no apparent reason? This is the shadow projecting itself in the other. What you hide in yourself begins to see and hate it in others. That's why the second half of life, according to Jung, is the time to look inside. It is not about improving the image. It's about integrating what you always tried to hide. Only then you are no longer controlled by unconscious impulses and start living consciously. You do not become perfect. You become whole. Jung believed that the true purpose of life is not to adapt, but to become whole. And this process he called individuation. While in youth we seek belonging and social recognition, in maturity there is another desire, to live in harmony with who we really are. Individual is to stop being just a role and to become an authentic person, aware of their lights and shadows. It is integrating the opposites, reason and emotion, persona and shadow, strength and vulnerability. This process is not easy. It involves internal conflicts, losses, ruptures. But that is precisely where growth lives. Individual is not isolated from the world, but finding a way of being in it without betraying itself. It is finding out that you can change your way without being lost. That can abandon old ideals without failing. That may be you, even if it contradicts all expectations. This is the work of the second half of life, abandoning masks and finding one's truth. In midlife, something we avoid throughout our youth begins to emerge: the shadow. Jung defines the shadow as the hidden side of our personality. It is the repressed desires, the unwanted emotions, the traits that do not fit the image of who we should be. During the persona building phase, the social mask we use to please and fit, we learn to hide everything that could generate rejection. But what is repressed does not disappear. He waits. And in the second half of his life, he begins to knock on the door. That's why many people come into crisis. They can't handle what the shadow begins to reveal. The contained anger, the hidden fear, the camouflaged sadness arises, feelings that seem to come out of nowhere, but are the result of years of internal silence. To face the shadow is not to surrender to chaos. It is to recognize what was rejected and then to integrate it consciously. The shadow is not the enemy. She is the mirror of our depth. To deny it is to live in half. To confront it is to step towards all. For Jung, the goal of the second half of life is not perfection. It is entirely. Individual is the process of integrating all parts of the psyche, the persona, the shadow, the unconscious, the desires, the fears, and the forgotten potentials. It is failing to live according to external scripts and live in alignment with one's own inner truth. This does not mean turning an ideal version of yourself. It means accepting both light and darkness. Recognize failures without guilt, the gifts without arrogance. True maturity is born when we realize that we are not only what we show to the world, but also everything we hide. Individual is a process, slow, deep, and sometimes painful, but it is also liberating. Jung did not see this as a spiritual luxury, but as a psychic necessity. Who does not individual lives divided. Those who are individual find peace, not because it is perfect, but because it is complete. In midlife, the shadow begins to knock on the door of consciousness. Everything you have suppressed to be accepted or succeed, desires, talents, emotions, questions, begins to emerge with strength. You may have stifled an old passion. Perhaps I have lived a lifetime trying to please. Perhaps it has hidden anger, sadness, or fragility. The shadow is not your bad side. It is the forgotten side. This is what has been rejected for you to fit in the world, but still live within you. Jung said that the more we deny the shadow, the more it controls us behind the curtains. It manifests itself in impulses, sabotage, crises, stave. Integrating the shadow is not to surrender to it. It is recognizing it honestly. It is admitting, I am also that. And from there, consciously choose who you want to be. This courage to look inside, to open the dark room of the soul, is what separates the adult from the aged teenager. This is what separates the awake from the distracted. Without this confrontation with the shadow, there is no individuation, just repetition. After facing the shadow, something new is born, or rather, something old, but hitherto hidden. Your true self. Authenticity is not being against or doing everything that gives on the tile. It is living with internal alignment. It is to act consistently with their own values, not with the borrowed values of the world. Jung said the persona is necessary, but it should never command the soul. The social mask must serve the individual, not enslave it. In midlife, this call to authenticity intensifies. You begin to realize how much you molded to fit and how much it cost you. That's when you start abandoning clothes that no longer serve. Patterns, roles, relationships, dreams of others, and in place something quieter, but more true. You no longer seek to be accepted. You seek to be real. This phase is not easy. Being authentic in a world that lives on appearances requires courage. But that's where life is no longer a staging and becomes experience. Jung believed that the second half of life is not just a continuation of the first. it has a completely different purpose. While youth focuses on conquering the external world, maturity is a call to dive into the inner world. It is when the spirit begins to whisper, when the old ideals of success and recognition are no longer enough, when the void charges meaning, not status. Here comes spiritual individuation, not in the traditional religious sense, but as a deeper integration with something greater, a sense of unity with life, with time, with its own soul. That's when you stop running and start walking, stop proving and start living. Jung called it to become who you are, a journey of reconnecting with the totality of being. This is the invitation of the second half of life, not being anymore, but be whole. Life really starts when you decide to stop living on autopilot, when you stop following what you expect from you, and it starts to follow what you really are. It doesn't matter if you are 40, 50, or 60 years. While you breathe, there is still time to start over, time to find. Jung reminds us, accepting himself is the hardest thing, but also the most liberating. And perhaps, only perhaps, this is the true meaning of life: become whole. If this video made sense to you, share it with someone who needs this reminder. Comment down here. Do you feel that you are living who you really are? Or are you looking for yourself? Leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because here we keep diving deep into the great issues of the soul. We see each other in the next video, and until then, meet again.